This is the story of the shoemaker and the elves. Once long ago, when shoes were all made by hand, a good shoemaker fell upon hard times through no fault of his own. No customers visited his shop, for there were no shoes on the shelves to buy. One day the shoemaker found that he had but one piece of leather left, and so he cut out pieces to make a pair of gentlemen's dress shoes. Oh, what will become of us, thought the shoemaker. He was so sad and discouraged that he didn't have the energy to sew the pieces together, and so he left them on the workbench. And later he and his wife went to bed. The next morning, when the shoemaker returned to the workshop, there on the bench were a completed pair of gentlemen's dress shoes. "Look at this fine workmanship," said the shoemaker. "Who has sewn these shoes?" asked his wife. Just then, ding-a-ling, the bell over the shop door rang, and in walked a gentleman wearing a top hat and holding a cane. "I think those shoes will do very well for me," said the gentleman, and trying them on, he found it was so. "How much for these shoes?" asked the gentleman. "1 gold coin," said the shoemaker. "I will give you 2, said the gentleman, and paying the shoemaker, he left the shop, wearing his fine new shoes, tipping his top hat, and twirling his cane. "With this money," said the shoemaker, "I can buy leather enough to make 2 pairs of shoes." And so he purchased shiny black patent leather, enough to make 2 pairs of fancy ladies' shoes. He cut out the pieces and left them on the workbench. Later, he and his wife went to bed. The next morning, there on the workbench stood 2 shiny pairs of fancy ladies' slippers with satin ankle ribbons. "These are very well made," said the shoemaker. "Who has done this?" cried the shoemaker's wife. Just then, ding-a-ling, the bell over the shop door rang, and in flounced a pair of young ladies in lace and feathers. They were as alike as a pair of white kid gloves. "Oh, look at these darling shoes. They are just the shoes for us," cooed the young ladies. And trying them on and tying up the ankle ribbons, they found it was so. Each young lady paid the shoemaker 2 gold coins for her shoes. And flouncing out of the shop, they left wearing their fancy slippers, feathers bobbing. "With this money," cried the shoemaker, "I have enough to buy leather to make 4 pairs of shoes." And so it went. Every day, customers crowded into the shop and purchased all the shoes that had been made the night before. With the money, the shoemaker bought more and more leather and cut out pieces to make more and more shoes. The next morning, there on the workbench lay those many pairs of shoes, so many shoes, shoes of all kinds, big shoes and small shoes, black shoes and brown shoes, white shoes and red shoes, shoes for men, shoes for women, shoes for children. And people flocked to the shop to purchase those shoes. The shoemaker and his wife grew rich and prospered once again. One day, as Christmas drew near, the shoemaker said to his wife, "Whoever is making these shoes is making us very happy. I wonder who it could be. Let us stay up tonight and find out," said his wife. And so that night, after the shoemaker had cut out the pieces of leather and left them on the workbench, he and his wife tiptoed into the workshop closet and hid behind the coats. They left the door open just a bit so that they could see what might happen. They waited a long time, and then, as the clock struck midnight, in scampered a pair of little men, barefoot and in rags. "Elves!" cried the shoemaker's wife. "Shh," whispered the shoemaker. And as they watched, the elves stitched with their silver needles, clip, clip, clipped with their silver scissors, and tap, tap, tapped with their silver needles. And when the shoes were finished, they arranged them neatly in pairs along the workbench and scampered away. The next morning, the shoemaker said to his wife, "These elves are making us very happy. I wish we could make them happy as well." "I think we can," said the shoemaker's wife. "Winter is coming. The elves will need warm clothes, and I will make them each a set of beautiful new clothes, shirts and pants, vests and jackets. And I will knit them each a pair of warm socks for their feet, and warm caps for their heads. And you can make them each a pair of tiny shoes." And so the shoemaker and his wife set to work on the gifts. On Christmas Eve, the gifts were finished. That night, the shoemaker left no leather on the workbench. Instead, he and his wife arranged the beautiful new clothes and shoes along the workbench. And then they tiptoed into the workshop closet and hid behind the coats. They left the door open just a bit so that they could see what might happen. They waited a long time. And then, as the clock struck midnight, in scampered the elves. Oh! They were surprised to find no leather on the workbench, but overjoyed to see the beautiful new clothes. They fingered the fine linen of the shirts. They ran their hands over the soft wool of the jackets. And then they tried on their new finery and admired themselves in the workshop mirror. Then they began to skip and dance all around the workshop, singing, "Such fine and handsome elves are we, no longer cobblers will we be. From now on we will dance and play, into the woods and far away." And with that, they scampered out the door and were never seen again. But the shoemaker and his wife lived a long and happy life.